I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, heart pounding as I checked my watch for the 5th time. The room was lovely, far more luxurious than anything I'd ever booked before, but I could hardly appreciate it. All I could think about was what I'd come here to do, the young man I'd soon be meeting, and this strange mixture of excitement and guilt twisting inside me. I was a retired school teacher, a widow in my 60s, for goodness sake. A lifetime spent being proper, devoted mother, dutiful wife, and now, here I was, waiting for someone young enough to be my grandson. The thought alone made my cheeks burn. 2 years had passed since my husband, Richard, had died. He was my first and only partner, and ours was a safe, reliable marriage. We'd done everything by the book, even if sometimes it felt like the book didn't leave much room for desire or curiosity. But since his passing, I'd felt this ache, a realization of things left unexplored, desires buried too deep even to admit to myself. Now, with my children living their own lives, there was nothing stopping me but my own hesitations. So here I was, daring to take a step I never thought I'd take. The knock at the door came, and I took a deep breath before opening it. Leo stood there, radiating a warmth and confidence that both startled and comforted me. He was tall, with a gentle smile that made his face somehow both boyish and wise. He greeted me with ease, and after a moment he asked, "Would you mind a kiss on the cheek?" It was such a small, respectful gesture, but it set my nerves at ease just a little. I nodded, and his lips brushed my cheek, a warmth that felt so foreign and yet achingly familiar. Seeing my nervousness, Leo suggested we sit and have a glass of champagne, just to ease into things. He poured us each a glass, and as we sipped, he began to ask me about my life. It was disarming how genuinely he listened. He didn't rush me or act like this was all routine. He actually cared about my answers. I found myself telling him things I'd never shared with anyone, not even with Richard. "I've always done what was expected of me," I admitted, eyes focused on the bubbles in my glass. "I had a proper life, teaching, raising a family, supporting my husband. But now, I feel like I'm at the end of my story, and I didn't even get to write any of it myself." My voice wavered, and for a moment I wondered if he thought I was silly. I was afraid to look up, to see what might be pity or, worse, boredom in his eyes. But when I finally did, he was smiling kindly, warmly. "It's not too late to start," he said, gently. "You deserve to experience whatever it is you've been waiting for." His words were simple, but the sincerity in them made my heart ache. As we kept talking, I could feel the tension in me loosening, replaced by something that felt almost like excitement. But there was still this tug-of-war inside, a part of me clinging to my upbringing, my sense of propriety. I caught myself wondering if he found me unattractive or ridiculous, and even stammered out something silly about whether he might need anything to help him perform. Leo laughed gently and reassured me, his hand resting on mine for a moment. "I don't need anything," he said, his voice low. "Nancy, I want to be here. With you." I excused myself to the bathroom to freshen up, trying to gather my thoughts and steady my breathing. My own reflection surprised me, the gray hair, the lines around my eyes. But I reminded myself why I'd come, what I wanted. Taking a deep breath, I returned to the room. The moment I walked back in, though, a sharp scent hit my nose, a candy bar he'd eaten, maybe just before he came up. It was such a trivial thing, but it felt like a reminder of the strangeness of all this, the gap between us. He noticed my hesitation immediately, setting his chocolate aside and quietly brushing his teeth before sitting back down. The small act felt caring, and I realized the discomfort was all mine, all these fears that I was too old, too out of place for something so intimate. In a moment of doubt, I blurted, "Maybe we don't need to go any further. I can still pay you for your time." The words came out all wrong, and I hated myself for them, but Leo only shook his head, smiling softly. "Nancy," he said, "it's okay to want this. It's not wrong to want something just for yourself. You've come all this way. Let's not let this moment pass." His words steadied me, and I nodded, even as my heart hammered in my chest. He moved closer, and I felt his hand in mine, the warmth and strength in his fingers grounding me. I started to see him as more than the role he played, a thoughtful, perceptive young man who had a life, struggles, maybe even hopes of his own. This wasn't about him giving me an experience, I realized. It was about connecting with another person, about both of us finding something meaningful here. When we lay together, there was no awkwardness, only a profound gentleness and a sense of discovery. For the first time, I felt seen, desired in a way I never had before. And in that moment, it didn't matter that he was half my age, or that I was a retired teacher taking a daring step beyond everything I'd known. All that mattered was that I'd finally allowed myself to feel alive, to want, and to accept that I was worthy of this new chapter in my story. When Leo walked back into the room, tension radiating off him like heat from a flame, I could feel every unresolved word hanging thick in the air between us. My heart was racing. I'd pushed too hard, asked too much. It was so easy to think of him as just Leo, the confident young man who'd seemed to step out of my fantasies. But now I'd glimpsed something else, something vulnerable and painfully human. And I couldn't ignore it. It all started with that list. Writing it had felt so foolish, so embarrassingly hopeful, like I was a teenager daring to name desires for the first time. But Leo, in his unflinching way, only smiled when I shyly shared it with him. I'd expected him to laugh, to maybe make me feel silly, but he just listened, nodding as if each line, each fear I was trying to conquer, deserved his full attention. "Oh, a list," he said, eyebrows raised in amusement. "You know, this sounds promising. Where's my copy? Don't mock me." I'd tried to sound firm, but I was already laughing. Old habits. A teacher's method for everything. "That's what I like about you, Nancy," he replied, a spark of playfulness in his eye. "You don't leave things unsaid." The truth was, I didn't want to leave anything unsaid anymore, especially around Leo. And each time I met him, I felt a little bolder, a little less afraid to just be. I told him things about myself I'd never even admitted to Richard, the years of tamping down my wants, the ache of feeling like a supporting character in my own life. With every conversation, I felt some small part of that old skin shed away, revealing a version of me that wasn't bound by what others thought. But Leo was a mystery in his own right. I knew next to nothing about his real life until, almost on a whim, I asked, "What's your real name?" He paused, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Then he looked down at the floor, rubbing his thumb along his knuckles as he answered, "Connor." That small revelation felt intimate, like a gift. But I was hungry to know more, and I couldn't stop myself from pressing. I wanted to know the person who was helping me find myself, to understand what lay beneath his own armor. When he shared that his mother thought of him as dead, to her, that even his profession was an elaborate cover, something in me cracked open. "I'm sorry," I'd whispered, reaching out to place a hand on his arm. "I didn't mean to intrude. I feel like I know you." He tensed, pulling away, his jaw tightening. "Nancy, this isn't supposed to be about me." The warmth drained from his face, and I saw the walls go up. "I'm whoever you want me to be, okay? That's what I'm here for." He gave me a look I hadn't seen before, guarded, hurt. In my naivete, I'd thought sharing this with him might bring us closer. I hadn't anticipated that it might drive him away. "Connor, please," I began, but he was already pulling on his jacket, gathering his things in swift, tense movements. I'd overstepped. This was supposed to be a space for me to explore, to feel safe in my own vulnerability. But it had become a place where I'd unknowingly prodded at his own scars. Then, as he was about to leave, he stopped suddenly. I heard his shaky breath, saw the way his hands tightened into fists. He turned back, looking at me with an intensity one hadn't seen before. "You have no idea what it's like to be seen as nothing, to feel the judgment without anyone saying a word. My mom didn't need to tell anyone I was dead to her. She just cut me out, and that was that. My whole life, she made me feel like I didn't exist." The weight of his confession struck me hard, rooting me to the spot. I reached out again, but he stepped back, shaking his head. There was a rawness in his voice, the echo of years spent hiding who he was. And as I looked at him, I realized that Leo Connor wasn't just some charming fantasy. He was a person, carrying a burden far heavier than I'd imagined. In one sharp, frustrated movement, he punched the wall, and I jumped at the sound. "Maybe this was a mistake," he said, voice thick. "I'll send your money back." He paused, glancing back at me one last time, as if waiting for me to say something that would ease the moment. But words failed me. All I could do was stand there, the room now feeling too big, too quiet, as he finally walked out. He left me there, with my list of wishes and an ache I didn't know how to fill. I'd come here searching for myself, only to stumble into someone else's pain. For the first time, I was forced to question what I'd really wanted from this arrangement. Was it just about feeling desired, or was I craving something deeper, a human connection, a glimpse behind the walls we all build to protect ourselves? Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who'd needed this moment, however messy it had turned out to be. Nancy takes a moment to reflect and realizes that her urge to know Leo better wasn't just curiosity, but a sign of her own insecurities and the lack of intimacy she's felt her whole life. She sees now that she crossed a line by pushing into Leo's personal life, understanding that his boundaries deserve respect. On the other hand, Leo also comes to a new understanding. He realizes Nancy's curiosity came from a place of genuine care, something he rarely encounters in his line of work. It wasn't an attempt to pry, but to make a real connection, and he finds himself grateful for her intentions, imperfect as they may have been. In their final meeting, they meet in the hotel cafe, both aware this will be their last encounter. There's a bittersweet atmosphere between them, a blend of acceptance and sadness. Nancy is a new version of herself. She's transformed from the anxious, hesitant woman she once was into someone who fully embraces her desires. With a confident smile, she tells him Sexual fulfillment is powerful. It made me feel invincible. She thanks 𝐦𝐤 for helping her find this part of herself and apologizes for any discomfort her curiosity might have caused him. 𝐦𝐤 acknowledges the impact of this journey as well. Through Nancy, he's been reminded of the importance of connection and understands the beauty of her vulnerability. Their time together has left a mark on him as much as it has on her. As they sit together, Nancy reflects on the bigger picture. Their encounters weren't just about physical intimacy, they were about finding herself, shedding old fears, and reclaiming her joy. She looks at 𝐦𝐤 and confesses, "You're the only adventure I've ever had. The only freedom." And I wanted it to be real. For 𝐦𝐤, this time with Nancy has been a revelation. Although his job as an escort involves connecting with many people, this unique bond with her has made him see the loneliness he sometimes feels within himself. He admits this openly, feeling thankful for the rare connection they shared. Their talk soon turns to the future, and it's clear that Nancy is ready to move forward in her life, stronger and more self-assured than ever. She no longer feels the need for validation. She's discovered her own worth and is ready to live fully for herself. For 𝐦𝐤, this final meeting is a reminder of why he chose his work in the first place. He finds purpose in making others feel valued. But he also realizes he could use a break to reflect on what he wants from life, inspired by Nancy's own journey of self-discovery. When the time comes to say goodbye, there's a gentle understanding between them. They know their journey together has come to an end, but the transformation they've helped each other achieve will stay with them. Nancy leaves with a sense of renewal, prepared to face life with confidence and joy. 𝐦𝐤, too, leaves feeling a sense of closure, proud of the role he played in her transformation and inspired to take time for his own journey forward. 𝐦𝐤, I think this should be the last time we meet, Nancy says softly. I'm glad you came. I'm glad we met. Thank you all for joining this deep dive into Good Luck to You, 𝐦𝐤 Grande. The film beautifully shows how human connection and self-discovery can change us in unexpected ways. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts on the movie in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about age gap romances and personal transformations. Until next time. As always, if I missed something or made a mistake, let me know. An AI narrates this because I'm still working on language skills and microphone quality. As I sat across from 𝐦𝐤 in the softly lit hotel cafe, I felt a calm I hadn't known before. I was no longer the nervous, questioning woman who'd first hired him, unsure of whether I even had the right to want this. Now, there was clarity, acceptance, a gentle sort of finality. I was grateful, even a little proud. I had changed in ways I never thought possible, and I owed so much of that to the young man sitting across from me. This was our last meeting. We both knew it without needing to say a word. There was a bittersweetness in that realization, a sense of goodbye that settled between us like the slight, respectful distance of our chairs. 𝐦𝐤 seemed more at ease, yet there was something thoughtful in his gaze, a tenderness that hadn't been there before. Sexual fulfillment, I began, taking a deep breath, is powerful. It made me feel invincible. I laughed softly, aware of how absurdly grand it sounded, but 𝐦𝐤 smiled, nodding as though he understood. And maybe he did. Thank you, 𝐦𝐤, for helping me find this part of myself. Connor, he corrected, his smile a bit shy now. his real name no longer needing to be hidden. And I should be thanking you too, Nancy. It was strange. I'd come into this thinking I was just one more client to him, but the way he was looking at me now told me that our time together had been as profound for him as it had been for me. I felt an unexpected rush of sadness, knowing that our connection had gone far beyond what either of us had planned. I wanted to apologize for the way I'd pried, for the uncomfortable moment when I'd pushed him to share more of himself than he was ready to. But Leo stopped me before I could finish. Nancy, it's okay. I understand why you asked. He looked down for a moment, then back up, his eyes open and soft. It's not often that people in my life care enough to want to know. We sat quietly for a moment, letting the meaning of his words sink in. This wasn't just about boundaries, but about connection, real human connection, a rare and fleeting thing, something we'd both been missing in our own ways. You know, I said, feeling a little bolder, you're the only adventure I've ever really had. The only freedom. I paused, taking in his expression, the warmth and understanding that filled his eyes. And I wanted it to be real. He nodded, his gaze intense yet kind. It was real, Nancy. It was real. In that moment, I felt the truth of it. Every second with Leo, Connor, had been genuine, and it had given me something priceless. He'd shown me that I could be free, that I was worth more than the roles I'd spent my life filling. And I realized I was ready to live for myself, without needing someone else's approval, without waiting for permission to embrace who I was. I glanced at Leo, suddenly feeling more hopeful for him than I'd expected. I could see that he, too, had grown, that maybe he'd started to question his own life in the same way he'd encouraged me to question mine. I hoped he would find his own version of freedom, perhaps take the time he needed to uncover the life he truly wanted. The hour drew to a close, and I felt a lump in my throat as I looked at him, preparing to say goodbye. I reached across the table, my hand touching his one last time, a gesture that felt so ordinary yet so intimate. Leo, I think this should be the last time we meet, I said softly. I'm glad you came. I'm glad we met. He smiled, the warmth of it touching his eyes. Me too, Nancy. We sat there a moment longer, both of us reluctant to let go. But when we finally did, I felt a sense of peace. I was walking away with a new understanding of myself, a version of me I had been too afraid to meet until now. And I knew he, too, would carry our time together with him, wherever he was going next. As I left the cafe, a feeling of quiet joy settled over me. I wasn't the same woman who had stepped into that hotel room weeks ago. I was free, alive, and ready to embrace whatever came next.